Proclamation number 8702, December 17th, 1963. The being's gradual higher development in creation. And thus listen to the following. When I transformed the beings which I had once emanated as strength into many different kinds of works of creation, it started the gradual higher development of these beings in their dissolved state. At first, it was an incredible mass of spiritual substance, which slowly took on form when my will solidified the spiritual strength into matter, and this matter was so differently natured again that it cannot be made understandable to you humans. According to my wisdom and my love, I had devised a plan of salvation for the fallen spirits, which was to be implemented in the creation. The purpose of my creation was to induce the bound spiritual substances within to be of service. Thus, one work of creation was needed for another in order to make it possible for a gradual higher development to take place. The serving functions at the beginning of creation cannot be made conceivable to you humans. Only when the works of creation became somewhat more solidified, some activity, albeit very slight, commenced. And every activity testifies to life. Every activity achieves a change. Therefore the forms also changed constantly, developing into even larger works of creation, each one of which had to fulfill a task determined by my will, and which was also carried out according to my will, because the spiritual substance was unable to resist my will. Therefore the creation did not arise in an instant through my will. Instead, the spiritual substances, or transformed strength, bound therein covered a slow path of development, so that its resistance gradually subsided, which manifested itself in being of service, which admittedly still happened under my law of compulsion, but nevertheless proved a reduction of opposition. And so the process of higher development through the mineral, plant, and animal world until the stage of a human being has been explained to you, such that the external forms constantly released the bound spiritual substances within, which linked up in order to take abode in a larger form again and continue their service, until all tiny particles belonging to a fallen original spirit had come together again, and were able to embody themselves as soul in a human being. But just as it happens in the animal world, that after dying, the smallest living organisms join other spiritual substances of the same degree of development and enter a larger external shape, so the process of development continued, and my love and my wisdom constantly created new forms which were able to accept the destined spiritual substance. In nature, you look upon this as evolution of a small living being into an even larger one. Yet, first I had to create a new form which previously had not yet existed. And although these forms constantly became larger and resembled the previous forms, it always involved an act of creation on my part, which, however, could not be observed by people because no one endowed with intellect and free will populated the earth as yet. However, my eternal plan was definite. Therefore, I also knew about the living creation, which was intended to live on earth as a human being, for the purpose of taking its final test of will. And thus the spiritual substances, which were still bound in the various works of creation, were continuously placed into new creations the closer the individual being's spiritual substance approached maturity. The works of creation became increasingly larger, which is not to be understood in terms of physical size, but the individual living being's constitution. Their functions and their abilities are referred to in this instance. Yet each new living creature was the work of my infinite love and wisdom and omnipotence, which consequently reproduced itself, but always remained the same creation as I had externalized it. Do understand that no living being will change its constitution, and where you believe you notice a change or further development, its emergence has been an act of creation on my part. Thus, every human-like creature inhabiting the earth before the creation of the first human being always were new creations, which, however, remained the species they were created as a product of my omnipotence. And since the bound spiritual substance within them constantly developed further, my will also created an increasingly more human-like external form. Yet this creation was always based on my will, which manifested itself as natural law again, what you humans now describe as the natural evolution of the beings. But the human being can never be regarded as a product of natural evolution, for he is a separate creation, having emerged from my omnipotence, love, and wisdom, and being designed such that he shall and is able to fulfill an eminent task on earth. Even if you try to train the most intelligent animals to think and decide independently, you will never succeed. For the abilities possessed by a human being are not hidden in any animal, for the human being is the only life form on earth in possession of thinking ability, intellect, and free will, which can never be slowly developed, nor are they attributes of a creature's gradual higher development. Instead, it merely proves that the human being is a work of creation in its own right, called into being through my will and my power in order to accomplish a task, and it was only possible to place the creation work, man, into the world after the once fallen original spirits had already covered the gradual higher development through the creations, because the human being was intended to shelter one such fallen original spirit within himself as soul. The word development only ever applies to the sheltering or bound spiritual substance in every work of creation which has to go through this upward development, whereas the material works of creation must always be regarded as acts of creation, because my will brought these external forms into existence in order to serve the spiritual substance as external shapes, which themselves should advance through being of service. The fact that my will simultaneously also signifies natural law, which no work of creation can resist, as long as it does not yet shelter a spiritually mature being like people do, will also explain the word development, but it will never justify the allegation that the human being evolved by himself, for he was a separate work of creation, which my will and my strength of love brought into life. Amen.